This is Michael Popok, Legal AF After Dark. We just had a deep discussion on our most recent episode of Legal AF, only on the MeidasTouch network. Ben Meiselas, my co-anchor and co-founder, and me talked about what we're seeing with Judge Scott McAfee, the state court judge, only been on the bench 6 months, but you would never know it by how he's handling his cases. And how he's handling particularly the 18-person criminal RICO racketeering conspiracy case brought against Donald Trump and all the Trumpers down in Georgia. He's doing a fantastic job with a lot of intellectual honesty in his rulings as he prepares to get ready for a trial in just 2 weeks of 2 out of the 18 in Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell. And so we talk about it and analyze it from our perspective as leading trial lawyers. Take a listen.
But speaking of process and procedure, I want to go to Georgia right now, though, because Judge Scott McAfee in the RICO case brought by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, he's a young judge. Hasn't been a judge for longer than like 6 months now, but he's aging in judicial dog years, if you will, because he is a wise sage on this bench right now. And this is someone who was appointed by a Republican governor who, he's made rulings that some of them have been, somewhat favorable to the requests being made by the co-defendants. Mostly they've been rejecting the gamesmanship and the chicanery and the attempts to dismiss by Trump's co-defendants. But it seems that there was this concerted effort by all of the co-defendants to kind of swarm this new judge with everything. And they threw everything at him, used every procedural rule in Georgia and local rule to try to throw him off. But he's kept steady. We have a trial of 2 co-defendants, Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell, former Trump lawyers, although I guess Sidney Powell is going to argue she was never Trump's lawyer. Good luck arguing that, even though you did 100 press conferences saying you are. But okay, that's Sidney Powell's argument. We've already got one plea agreement of one of the 19 co-defendants. We talked about that on the last Legal AF. I'm just very impressed by McAfee. Popok, walk us through some of the things that McAfee did this week as we head to our first trial that's going to be broadcast live here on the MeidasTouch network.
They're picking a jury in 2 weeks, a jury in a case that is the criminal conspiracy against now 18, because Scott Hall has flipped and is cooperating with Fani Willis completely, and there'll be others. She's made plea bargain deals to at least 6 or 8 that have been publicly acknowledged. She will not be trying a case of 18 people or 16 remaining people. By the time she gets around to trying her case, I'm sure she will cut plea deals with at least half of the group that's pictured there. And she'll go to trial against 5 or 6, including one Donald Trump, sometime in 2024. Because that's her MO, and that's what good prosecutors do. When she had the larger case for a criminal conspiracy involving the Atlanta Public School Board and a bribery scandal there, she had 32 people under indictment as opposed to the 19 here. She went to trial against 12, and the rest she pled out. And so we have that going on. We also have Scott McAfee, who in the beginning you and I were a little bit reticent about, because when we saw his resume, we're like, oh God, young judge, never served a day, in his 30s, never been a judge before, and was in the Federalist Society when he was in law school. Who does that sound like? Sounds like Judge Cannon. And we have the anti-Cannon. It's the opposite of Cannon. And now we know more about McAfee. I did a nice hot take on this particular issue. First of all, he's a law nerd. And he's a nerd in a lot of different ways, but a nerd that has a good sense of humor and a deadly sense of humor when it comes to making his rulings. There's a lot of intellectual honesty in how he makes his rulings. If I agree with him, I understand why I agree with him. And if I disagree with him, I understand why I disagree with him based on the precedent and of Georgia criminal practice and procedure, which he learned at the knee of one Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA. Not only did they work together in the office, he was her underling. He was her subordinate in a division of that office when she wasn't yet the DA, but was working in that office that dealt with complex commercial litigation. So he has a lot of respect for Fani Willis, and he learned his craft and his trade from her. before he got on the bench, appointed by, yes, a Republican governor, but one that is an anti-Trumper and will testify against Trump in Kemp. He's a Kemper, not a Trumper. It was the inspector general for the state, which is the chief Boy Scout for the state involved with public corruption. McAfee, and I found the clip and I used it in one of my hot takes, 15 years ago was doing a cello. He's the cellist, a classically trained cellist. They did it professionally. And there's a clip of him as a goof in a talent competition doing on an electric cello Jimi Hendrix, including, dropping to his knees and using his mouth to move the cello, when I saw that, I understood why when he rejected this week yet another, and this is now 6 or 7 motions to dismiss the indictment by Ken Chesborough, who's just trying not every which way to file whatever piece of paper to avoid the inevitable, which is his trial starting on the 23rd of October. This time, the judge sort of had enough, but rather than showing his ire, did it in a humorous way. He called the argument to dismiss the indictment because the special assistant district attorney who was handling the case, because sometimes prosecutors, even though they have big offices, they appoint for limited purposes, special purpose, if you will, assistant district attorneys. And they did for this case. And he is the lead trial lawyer for the case. He came out of private practice. And he's he's basically deputized to be for this case only. I've done that. I've been an assistant district attorney for the Manhattan DA's office when I was a second-year lawyer arguing an appeal, which I took for practice, but I was really appointed for that position for the appeal. So it happens. They argue that he needed to take an oath, but there's an oath of office requirement, and he didn't take the oath of office, and therefore the indictment should be dismissed that he was involved with. And the judge just shook his head and said, you're not even reading the statute properly. The statute says unless it's only for a limited purpose appointment. And if it's a limited purpose appointment, you can't make the oath argument. But to pay them back a little bit, he referenced a Monty Python, the British comedy sketch team, and one of their most famous sketches, which is called the Dead Parrot sketch, where a person comes back to try to sell a dead parrot back to a pet shop and argue that it's not dead, it's alive. And you can tell where the comedy comes from there. And so the judge called the argument in the second half of his order, the dead parrot. And he says, continuing with the dead parrot, as if the parrot wasn't already dead, you suffered no prejudice as a result of the lack of an oath, even if you were right. The fact that he referenced Monty Python to tell him your argument is dead, yet you keep dragging it and trying to convince me that it's alive, it comes right out of a law nerd who would also play the cello in Jimi Hendrix to win a talent competition. So we like everything so far about McAfee, who is keeping this case on track. You'd think this guy had handled dozens and dozens and hundreds of trials. Judge Chutkan was a trial lawyer herself who went to trial 15 or 18 times as a trial lawyer. As a judge, she's handled hundreds and hundreds of cases since she was appointed by Obama, okay, including dozens of Jan 6th cases about Jan 6th insurrectionists. This judge, this is his first major trial. You would think that he's been doing this for like years, because he's got an answer, an order, a procedure, a method for everything that he's doing, in stark contrast to what you did with Judge Cannon, which is she's fumbling around in the dark to try to benefit Donald Trump with these ridiculous orders that we can't make heads or tails out of, even though we get this is our job to do that. And then you see McAfee. Here's a question for you, Ben. It is obvious that the biggest criminal jeopardy issue for Donald Trump, because his "I'm going to be president one day and that'll take care of my criminal problems" defense goes out the window, because you can't federally pardon a state prosecution. So even if he gets convicted, in Georgia, he may go to jail in Georgia and no one can pardon him. The governor's not going to pardon him, and the governor doesn't pardon in Georgia. It's a board. So why hasn't he tried to influence, I'll use that term, Judge McAfee, and to go after him in any way to destabilize that justice system and that, the Georgia criminal process? Why hasn't he done that? even though that is really the case that presents the biggest possibility for Donald Trump to be convicted of an unpardonable crime. Why hasn't he?
I think Judge McAfee's a bit of an enigma. He is, and he hasn't made any overt ruling that Donald Trump has felt the tangible impact of yet. He will attack McAfee at some point, and we'll probably see that in the next few months. But, the usual misogynistic tendency doesn't apply there. The basically saying, New York or Democrat doesn't apply there. The kind of anti-Semitic undertones doesn't really apply there. The racial stuff that he doesn't apply there. And so he doesn't have his normal go-tos are usually based upon this kind of the hateful rhetoric. And he'll come up with something for McAfee at that time. But I think in Trump's mind, that trial as it relates to him is still pretty far in the future. So just kind of not wasting the energy there yet. I think it probably feels like it's an eternity for him because let's face it, this first trial of the co-defendants who asked for the speedy trial, Chesebro Powell, they filed more motions to dismiss this week, ridiculous ones that the judge again was like, no, stop it. You're going to trial. You wanted this. This is the speedy trial you demanded. Make your case to the jury. Stop whining and complaining to me about it. You made your bed. Now sleep in it. Is basically what McAfee said. But this trial is going to take 6 months, right? So it's going to take 6 months. And then that Trump trial, just the reality of it to set expectations, that won't take place until at earliest late 2024, probably 2025. And so he's focused on these targets. That's
I agree with you. Everything you just said, I agree with you. It's too early. They're keeping their powder dry. Steve Sadow, the new lawyer, has been drafting behind a bicycle race term, drafting behind literally the other lawyers who are filing papers. He hasn't really filed a substantive paper of his own yet to dismiss the indictment, but they should not underestimate the what would happen and what will happen if Fani Willis, as expected, wins the first trial, because that shows that a jury in Fulton County presented with evidence and witness as opposed to rhetoric and table thumping convicted 2 out of 19 co-conspirators for the same conspiracy. She will then learn from that. She will then use that to bludgeon other co-conspirators further down the food chain to get them to flip and cooperate as she circles and encircles Donald Trump. It doesn't mean it's not to we have a lot of people that watch around the world and also in our own justice system. The next jury is not, except what they pick up in the media, is not going to know about nor be instructed that a prior jury already convicted 2 people. In fact, our jurisprudence doesn't allow that because the case has to rise and fall on the evidence for one defendant. Or how many defendants are in the room at that particular moment. So they won't know that, and there'll be a motion that will be granted by McAfee to make sure that the prosecutors don't mention the prior convictions, and they won't. But it does give Fani Willis the ability to have a major dress rehearsal before she takes her show to Broadway, right? This is she gets to improve the way she presents evidence. It's like, forget about a mock jury where we hire people and pay them to sit and listen to us as lawyers to figure out how to fix our arguments before we go to a trial, which happens, and we do. This is a real jury. And so she'll say, well, that didn't work. And I got to bring in this witness earlier, and I got to emphasize this issue or that issue, because she'll end up talking to the jury, which she's allowed to do with the other lawyers present, to debrief them, the ones that want to participate, about what worked and what didn't work in terms of evidence and witnesses and presentation. And then she'll use that like a good, like artificial intelligence keeps learning. They're learning with real intelligence about how to try the case against Donald Trump, which is always right, ever present in her mind. And so I am fascinated, I guess is the right word, that they're not trying to destabilize the justice system. They fired Drew Little, who was Drew Findling. Sorry, I was combining the two lawyers. Drew Findling, who was filing lots of bombastic motions to attack the justice system, and Fani Willis and the court system, and they fired that guy. And the new guy, I guess they're listening to, which is keep your powder dry. Let's see what happens just in another 2 weeks when they pick a jury, and let's see over the next 3 to 5 months, whatever that jury takes, what we can glean from that and use in our next trial. It is a moment of sober approach that I thought Donald Trump was not capable of. And so I think you're right. When he finally tastes McAfee's reasoning and it goes against him, we're going to start hearing about, oh, he's a stooge of Governor Kemp who hates me, and he's just a rhino or this, but you're right, all the rest of it, the dehumanizing comparisons to animals, racist tropes, sexist tropes, Marxists, communists arguments all go out the window. And one last thing about McAfee, I caught an interview that didn't get a lot of press in the New Yorker magazine. I talk about it in my hot take with McAfee. And McAfee said two things that I think if I was Donald Trump, it would put a cold chill down my spine. He said, firstly, I joined the Federalist Society when I was in law school, but it was really a social business thing, not an ideological thing. He said it out loud. He said that, when you're a young, small C conservative, real conservative, and you're in Georgia, to be frank, the Democrats don't have an organization at the law school level the way the Federalist Society has. That's one of the great dirty secrets of the Federalist Societies. They start from the law school level, even the high school level, and then they get it all the way up to the top as they pick their judges. Democrats don't have that comparable thing. So if you're looking around for an organization and you want to become a judge one day or stay in government one day, it's natural. He said again, though, it's not ideological. It was mainly social and business. He also said, my number one goal in this trial is not to be Lance Ito, the famous dancing Ito judge from the O.J. Simpson. I want to recede into the woodwork, so I am not the story, and I am only making decisions on balls and strikes. This is not a guy or a judge that is going to be intimidated. That will backfire for Donald Trump, and this is somebody that does not want to make this trial about him. I love Judge Engoron, but there was that moment where right at the beginning of the trial, he took off his glasses and looked over to the cameras that were in the courtroom and smiled. You are not going to see Scott McAfee do that. It's the opposite of his DNA.
Well, couldn't agree more with you there. And I think it's why we get into the weeds here on Legal AF about everything that's going on, because it's not just for this episode. Inherently court cases are episodic. There's a reason why it says the wheels of justice turn slowly or grind slowly. And it's bit by bit. And I know everybody wants accountability right now. But what we've been saying now since we've been doing Legal AF for several years is here's what leads to this, which leads to this. And we get closer to real kind of critical moments like the one we finally saw in New York earlier this week with those Perry Mason moments where Trump's executives are like, we did it, we did it. Or you get a big partial summary judgment shutting down the Trump organization, or you get a conviction. There are so many people who said Donald Trump will never get charged with anything. And we were saying here on Legal AF, no, he's going to get charged. And people were saying, no, you're just gaslighting us. You're trying to give us hopium. You're just saying that. I go, no, he's going to be charged. And we said he was going to be charged in all of the cases he was going to be charged in, because that's ultimately what the data reflected. Then there were lots of people who were like, we don't like Jack Smith when Jack Smith's name was announced first, or we don't like Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. And we said, okay, you're entitled to hold those opinions, but may we offer this data? Here's what Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is doing. Here's the strategy. Here's why. Let's bring on Karen Friedman Agnifilo, the top number 2 at the district attorney's office for 30 years. Let's see what she has to say. And by the way, she worked with Jack Smith. Here's data. You do what you want with the data, but I'm not going to be gaslighting you. I want to just show you what the data says and form your own opinions, but let's base it on facts and evidence and data. That's what we stand for here. You could certainly disagree with us, but let's agree here are at least what the facts are, not that maga-splaining that you're getting that legacy media is unfortunately perpetuating. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. There's going to be a lot of big developments over the next few weeks and months. And I know it's difficult to kind of keep this patience while all of the legacy media and right-wing echo chambers and Trump and others continue to gaslight. But you got the best team of prosecutors across the country handling the case and cases. You've got mostly good judges on these cases. You're going to have a jury who's going to evaluate most of these cases, other than the one in New York before Judge Engoron. And there's going to be outcomes that will be evidence-based, and we'll accept those outcomes, whatever they are, when the evidence is presented, and we'll keep you up to date here on Legal AF.
Well, if you like that clip, then you're going to love what we do every Wednesday and Saturday exclusively on the MeidasTouch Network on Legal AF. On Wednesdays, my co-anchor is Karen Friedman-Ignifilo, 30-year prosecutor, to match my 30 years of defense experience. On the weekends, we got Ben Meiselas, who founded the show with me, longtime civil rights lawyer, and we do that. We analyze, we catch, analyze, observe, explode, reassemble right in front of you. Issues that are important at that intersection of law, politics, and justice. And we only do it in one place, on the MeidasTouch Network, that's in favor of pro-democracy, as you must be, since you're either a subscriber or you like watching our content. Help them get the MeidasTouch Network to 2 million free subscribers on YouTube. It helps. The larger they are, the more your voice is heard. Give us a thumbs up on this particular clip and watch it all the way to the end. That also helps with the algorithms. So until my next hot take, until my next episode of Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. All right, bumpers are done.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.